plane landed after 37 years later. The story is about a passenger airliner that departed from New York on July 1st, 1955 with 57 passengers on board. It unexpectedly disappeared from the radar, and then, according to some witnesses, it reappeared 37 years later at a Caracas airport. Let me start from the beginning. In the end, I will reveal how it ended. A question arises. Was the plane sucked by space-time or the sea? The plane left New York in the morning and everything went smoothly. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-4, one of those vehicles that had propellers and not turbines like today's airplanes. However, the flight was supposed to be in Florida 3 hours later, but it never arrived, and it didn't land anywhere else until 37 years later. But what happened? When the air traffic controller contacted the New York Tower, they got a puzzling response. Pan Am Flight 914 had disappeared from the radar without a trace. Everything indicated that the plane was lost. Air traffic control was unable to reach the pilots even by radio. Thus began the search. One of the theories was that Pan Am Flight 914 had crashed on the Atlantic Ocean. A crash in which 61 people, including crew members, would have lost their lives. But it remained a hypothesis because certain evidence was never collected. Every time a plane crashes like this, some remains are found, whether it falls to the ground or into the water. Even in the water, some remains of the plane would float to the surface and be found. In this case, nothing was found. There are two main points. First, the pilots had not sent requests for help via the radio. It was total silence. Second, no pieces of the plane were ever found. It seemed to have disappeared into thin air. For years, this story aroused curiosity and mystery. When obvious answers and proofs are not found, everything becomes a mystery. The fact is, no theory explained with certainty what had happened to Pan Am Flight 914. The most probable theory remained that it fell on the Atlantic Ocean until the incredible happened that turned this story into one of the most bizarre and incredible stories you have ever heard. The description of the 92 report, the testimony of an air traffic controller at Caracas airport whose name was Juan de la Corte. It was as quiet on his tower as every morning when a green dot appeared on the radar, appearing out of nowhere. It shouldn't have been there because there were no flights waiting to arrive. Suddenly, the Pan Am 914 as it disappeared was back, but Juan still didn't know. At first, it looked like a normal plane ready for landing, but then both Juan and the others realized that something was wrong. It was an antique plane. By now in the 90s they were all planes with turbines, and that one had propellers. A question came from Pan Am, that is, where are we? The control tower asked the pilot to identify himself. The answer was, we are Pan Am Flight 914 route from New York to Miami, Florida, with a crew of 4 and 57 passengers on board. At this point, the control tower personnel were standing in silence. What was the Pan Am flight doing 2,000 km from the destination, and how did it get there? The ground units were immediately called to help the plane and passengers. The plane managed to land without problems. After recovering, Juan decided to ask the pilot a question that bothered him. Do you know that today is September 9, 1992? After a long silence, Juan heard the panicked pilot's voice saying, Jesus Christ, Jimmy, where are we? No, stay away, now let's go. The pilot restarted the engines and, without waiting for the takeoff, brought the plane to the runway and took off despite Juan trying to stop it. For some time, Pan Am Flight 914 could be seen in the air, but it soon vanished into thin air again. The pilot of the plane probably realized he was in some strange place, a different world, and in terror, so he flew away. The truth is in the power of mystery. It must be said that this story is very controversial. First of all, because the incredible story that happened in Caracas was reported by a tabloid called Weekly World News, a newspaper that had already known the story of the plane that disappeared in 1985, 7 years before the alleged appearance. Subsequently, the same tabloid published 2 other versions, changing something like the photo of Juan de la Corte and adding some details.
Please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, that's it. Thanks for supporting us.
Basically, the rest of the story is a tale of fantasy, an exaggerated word of mouth perhaps, or a person that just wanted attention, or a reporter having fun. There is no truth. No apparitions occurred 37 years later of Pan AM 914. It's accepted that most likely and unfortunately, Pan AM 914 is on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and it is a part of the tragedies that sometimes happen.